The great crystal hall of the Valorian Empire shimmered with 1,000 blue lights, each reflecting from the walls like liquid stars. The ceiling arched so high that it disappeared into a mist of silver dust, and beneath it stood the most powerful beings in the galaxy. They whispered in dozens of alien tongues, their jeweled robes brushing the floor as they gathered around the central dais. At the heart of it all stood a single human, chained and surrounded by guards in black armor. His name was Captain Elias Ward, once a decorated explorer from Earth, now a prisoner of the Empire he had accidentally trespassed into. Every eye in the chamber glared at him with contempt. No human had ever stood in the Valorian court before, and none expected to survive it. The Empress herself, tall and radiant in her armor of silver plates, sat upon her throne of light, her expression carved from ice. Her daughter, Princess Lyra Valoris, sat one step below her, dressed in a flowing gown of emerald light, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Her face was calm, but her fingers trembled against the edge of her seat. The air was heavy with silence. The Empress raised her staff and the hall fell still. "Human," she said, her voice sharp like breaking glass. "You crossed into forbidden Valorian territory, destroyed our probes, and defied the law of the stars." Elias lifted his head, his face pale but proud, his voice low yet steady. "I came only to rescue stranded miners," he said. "I didn't know your patrols had claimed that system?" A ripple of laughter echoed through the crowd, cruel and echoing. One noble hissed, "Lies, human arrogance," while another sneered, "They always claim ignorance before death." The Empress's eyes narrowed, her lips curling slightly. She turned to her daughter. "The humans always bring excuses," she murmured. "This one will be no different." But Lyra said nothing. Her gaze stayed locked on Elias, watching him with something no one else could see. Curiosity, maybe even understanding. When Elias was asked for his final statement, the hall grew silent again. He looked up at the Empress, then at the hundreds of alien faces staring with hatred, and finally his eyes met Lyra's. "I only came here to save lives," he said softly, "even if they weren't human." A strange silence spread. The laughter died, the whispers stopped, and even the Empress leaned forward slightly. No one spoke those words in the Valorian court. Not to save others, not even their own kind. Lyra's eyes widened, something shifting deep within them. In that moment, she stood up, her chair scraping against the polished floor. The guards froze, the nobles gasped. Her voice was soft but carried across the chamber like thunder. "I invoke the right of claim," she said. The Empress blinked, her expression turning from surprise to disbelief. "Lyra, you can't," she whispered. "Not for a human." Every noble in the hall erupted in shock. The right of claim was an ancient law, one that allowed a royal to take any prisoner into their custody. It was meant to preserve honor or protect valuable captives. Not to save a human outsider, Lyra walked forward, her gown gliding behind her like flowing mist. Until she stood before Elias, the guard stepped aside, uncertain whether to stop her. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time, Elias saw not a princess but a person, someone who saw him as more than just a prisoner. Her golden eyes reflected the light of the throne above. She leaned closer, and in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said words that froze the entire court. "He's mine!" The chamber exploded in gasps. Some nobles shouted in outrage, others whispered in fear. The Empress rose from her throne, fury and confusion written across her face. "Lyra Valoris," she shouted, "you disgrace the throne. You claim a human as your own?" But the princess stood firm, her chin raised, her voice unwavering. "Yes, mother," she said, "I claim him under the old law." Elias could barely speak. He didn't understand why she was doing this, what it meant or how it would end. But when she turned to look at him again, her expression carried something beyond duty, something like defiance. The Empress finally sank back into her throne, her eyes narrowing. "So be it," she said coldly. "But remember, Lyra, the court remembers everything." The chains around Elias's wrist were released. Clattering to the ground like thunder, the guards stepped back, uncertain whether to salute or to flee, as the nobles whispered furiously among themselves. Lyra turned and said quietly, "Follow me, human." As they walked out of the great hall together, the eyes of 1,000 alien nobles followed them, some with hatred, some with envy, and some with fear. For the first time in centuries, the Valorian court had witnessed something forbidden, an act of rebellion, born not from strength or violence, but from choice. Elias glanced back once at the throne, where the Empress sat in icy silence, her gaze burning holes into their backs. He didn't know what fate awaited him now, but deep inside a strange thought took root. Maybe, just maybe, the princess who claimed him had done so not to save his life, but to change the fate of both their worlds. And somewhere beyond the walls of the palace, the galaxy itself seemed to pause and listen, for in that moment, a single human had been claimed by a royal of the stars, and nothing would ever be the same again. The corridors of the royal palace were quiet as Lyra led Elias through them, her pace steady, her expression unreadable. The air smelled faintly of burning metal and flowers that glowed faintly along the crystal walls. 2 guards followed at a distance, their steps echoing like whispers of disapproval. Elias kept his head low, still trying to understand what had just happened. He had been one breath away from execution, yet now he was walking beside a princess who had just defied an empire. They entered a vast chamber with glass walls overlooking the twin moons of Valoria. Lyra turned to the guards, her tone sharp. "Leave us," she ordered. The guards hesitated but obeyed, sealing the doors behind them with a metallic hiss. For a long moment neither spoke. Elias finally broke the silence, his voice quiet but full of disbelief. "Why did you do that?" he asked. "Why claim me in front of everyone?" Lyra looked out the window, the moon's reflection shining in her golden eyes. "Because they would have killed you," she said softly. "And because I needed to know what kind of human you are." Elias frowned. "You don't even know me." She turned to him, her expression serious. "I know enough." She walked closer, her voice low. "Your people fight when every other species would surrender. Your ships travel where others fear, and your kind never bow." Her words hung in the air. "You said you came to save lives," she continued. "That's not something Valorians say anymore." Elias didn't know how to respond. He had expected mockery or interrogation, not curiosity. Lyra sighed and gestured to the seat beside her. "Sit, Captain," she said. "You are now under my protection. By royal decree." He sat cautiously, still scanning the room as if expecting the guards to return at any second. Lyra smiled faintly, reading his thoughts. "They won't harm you now, not while the law protects you," she said. "But make no mistake, this choice has a cost." Outside the palace, the whispers of the court spread like wildfire. Every noble, every official, and every servant now knew that the princess had claimed a human. Some called it madness, others called it rebellion. The Empress, furious but bound by the ancient law, ordered that the princess's quarters be guarded and monitored. Lyra was now both shielded and trapped by her own decision. Days passed, Elias was given quarters near Lyra's private study. Though his every move was tracked by palace drones, he ate food he didn't recognize, learned phrases in the Valorian tongue, and tried to stay invisible. But Lyra often summoned him, asking questions about Earth, its wars, its people, its strength. She wanted to understand the mind of humanity, not just the flesh. "You humans," she said one evening. "You fight not for empire, not for resources, but for something unseen." Elias nodded slowly. "We fight for each other," he said. "That's what keeps us alive." Lyra studied him in silence. For a princess raised in perfection and power, his words sounded like something from another world. Her voice softened. "If my people had hearts like yours, maybe we would not need slaves or soldiers." Elias looked at her, unsure whether it was safe to speak. "Maybe your people don't need to be like mine," he said. "Maybe they just need someone to remind them why they exist." She turned away, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think that's what I'm doing?" she asked quietly. Elias shrugged. "You saved my life." "Princess, that's a start." Later that night, as Lyra sat by her balcony, she received a private transmission from her mother. The Empress's hologram flickered before her, eyes cold and sharp. "You have humiliated our bloodline," the Empress said. "You risk the peace of the court for a creature beneath us." Lyra bowed her head, but her voice remained calm. "I did what I thought was right," she said. "He's not what they think he is." The Empress leaned closer, her tone like steel. "Then prove it," she said. "Or I will have him removed, law or no law." The hologram vanished. Leaving Lyra in silence, she stood there, staring at the city lights stretching far below. The hum of the royal fleet filled the night like a distant heartbeat. She clenched her hands, whispering to herself, "If I can show them what he is, maybe I can change everything." The next morning, Lyra summoned Elias to the training chamber. When he arrived, she was already waiting, dressed not as a princess, but in the black armor of the royal guard. Elias blinked, unsure what to say. Lyra smirked. Her voice steady. You said humans survive through strength. Through will, she said. Teach me. He stared at her, realizing she wasn't asking for protection. She was asking for transformation, and as he picked up the training staff she handed him, he saw something new in her eyes. Determination, maybe even fire for the first time since his capture. Elias smiled faintly. All right, princess, he said. Let's begin. Outside the chamber, the guards watched in silent disbelief. No one dared to speak. But everyone knew something had changed. A forbidden alliance had begun, one that could either save their empire or burn it to ashes. And deep within the heart of the Valorian palace, the whispers of destiny began to stir. The princess had claimed a human, but soon the galaxy would learn it was not the human who had been tamed. It was the stars themselves that would bend to their choice. The training chamber glowed with a faint silver light as morning broke over the Valorian capital. Lyra stood opposite Elias, her armor glinting under the pale suns. Her hair tied back, her expression fierce but focused. Elias adjusted his stance, holding the slender practice staff she had given him. His movements calm, disciplined for hours. They had moved in silence, exchanging blows, testing reflexes, learning rhythm. To any onlooker, it looked like a lesson in combat. But for both of them, it was something more. Lyra was not like the other nobles. Where they sought dominance through fear, she sought understanding through strength. When she struck, it was not to hurt, but to learn. And each time Elias countered her move, she seemed less like a princess and more like a soldier learning to survive. When the match ended, sweat glistened on her brow, and she smiled faintly. You don't fight like my people, she said. Breathing hard, Elias handed her a towel, his tone soft. Your people fight to win, humans fight to live. She looked at him curiously. Wiping her face, there's a difference? Yes, he said simply. One ends when the battle does. The other never ends. For a moment, she was silent, letting his words sink in. Then she turned toward the wide glass wall of the chamber, where the endless expanse of the Valorian city shimmered below. I claimed you to save you, she said at last. But now I see it might be something more. Elias tilted his head, wary. Something more? Lyra nodded, her golden eyes gleaming. You came here from a world everyone mocks, yet you speak like someone who carries a universe inside him. She folded her arms, her voice quiet but sharp. Do you know what the Valorian Empire truly fears, Captain Ward? He shook his head. No. Lyra leaned closer, her tone turning almost secretive. They fear your kind, she whispered. Not your weapons, not your ships, but your spirit. Elias frowned. Then why do they treat us like vermin? She smiled sadly. Because it's easier to chain what you fear than to face it. The words hit him like gravity. He finally understood. Her act in the court wasn't madness or mercy. It was strategy. She hadn't claimed him just to save his life. She had done it to learn what humanity was, to understand the strength her empire lacked. That night, while Elias rested in his small chamber, Lyra stood before her private console, entering encrypted codes into the system. The holographic display filled the room with a soft blue glow, showing restricted files labeled Human Archives, Forbidden. She scanned the records, old reports of Earth's wars, the fall of colonies, and one disturbing note from Valorian intelligence. It read, Human adaptability exceeds expected limits. They turn every defeat into evolution. They are the only race that does not break. Lyra stared at the words for a long time. Her heartbeat quickening, she whispered to herself. That's what they're hiding. She downloaded the files into a secure memory crystal, knowing if she were caught it would be considered treason. When Elias entered later that night, she quickly turned off the console, pretending to study battle maps. He raised an eyebrow, noticing her unease. Are you spying on your own empire now? He asked with a half smile. Lyra didn't answer, just looked at him for a moment before saying, Tell me, Elias, how do humans deal with fear? He thought for a moment, then said quietly, We don't deal with it, we move through it. Even when you know you'll fail? She asked, especially then, he said, his eyes steady. That's when it matters most. Her lips curved into a small, thoughtful smile. Then maybe the galaxy needs a little of that madness, she whispered. The next morning, she took him to the Hall of Memories, A vast chamber filled with ancient statues of Valorian heroes. Each figure was carved from starlight stone. Tall, proud, and cold. These are our legends, she said. They fought for power, control, empire. Elias walked among them, his gaze sharp. And how many fought for people? Lyra paused, her eyes lowering. None. He turned to her. That's your weakness. Princess, not your weapons or ships, but your heart. His words struck deep. For the first time, she saw the truth she had always ignored. The empire was powerful. Yes, but hollow inside, she looked at him with new resolve. If I could change that, she said, would your people help? Elias met her gaze, steady and fearless. If you mean it, humanity will stand beside you. But as they spoke, a faint hum echoed through the chamber. Unseen surveillance drones gliding silently between the statues. Their lenses blinked red, recording every word. Far above in the royal tower, the Empress watched the footage in silence, her expression unreadable. So, she whispered, my daughter plots with a human. Back in the hall, Lyra felt a chill crawl down her spine as if unseen eyes were upon them. She glanced toward the balcony where the wind whistled faintly, her instincts sharp. Elias, she said in a low tone, we're being watched. He nodded, his soldier's senses already aware. We need to be careful, he said. If they think you've betrayed them, you'll lose everything. Lyra looked at him and smiled sadly. Maybe that's the price of freedom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, then you're more human than you know. Outside, the stars shimmered like cold witnesses. The Empire thought it still ruled in silence, but deep within its shining heart, a human and a princess had already begun to rewrite its destiny, and the galaxy, though it did not yet know it, was already trembling at the edge of change. The palace corridors no longer felt safe. Every polished mirror seemed to watch. Every wall hummed with the faint whisper of hidden surveillance. Lyra had grown quiet since the encounter in the Hall of Memories. Her usual confidence replaced with something sharper, awareness. Elias noticed it in the way she glanced over her shoulder before speaking, in how her voice dropped when the drones passed by. The Empire's eyes were everywhere, and both of them knew it. One evening, while the suns dipped below the horizon, painting the alien sky with violet light, Lyra called Elias to the observation chamber. The room was empty, save for the endless glass dome showing the stars beyond. He entered cautiously, noticing that she had sealed the doors manually. A dangerous act in the palace. She stood by the console, her armor faintly gleaming, a strange crystal glowing in her palm. Elias, she said softly, I want to show you something. He approached, and she placed the crystal on the table. Activating it with a touch, a hologram bloomed between them, displaying maps of ancient battle routes and hidden archives marked with the seal of the Valorian High Council. These files are forbidden to everyone except the Empress, Lyra said. But I broke the seal. Elias frowned. You risked your life for this? Her golden eyes met his, steady and unflinching. I needed to know the truth, she whispered. And now I do. The hologram shifted, showing images of devastated planets, scorched worlds, burned cities, and millions of corpses that were not alien, but human. Elias's eyes widened as he recognized old Earth colonies, destroyed decades ago during the first contact wars. Lyra's voice trembled. Your people didn't start the war. Elias, my ancestors did, she paused, staring at the images. They invaded your worlds. They enslaved your colonies, and then they erased the records. Elias clenched his fists, his breath unsteady. So they lied, he said coldly. They said humanity attacked first. Lyra nodded, guilt clouding her face. I didn't know, she said. None of us did. They built our empire on silence and fear, and I've lived in that silence my whole life. Elias turned away, his jaw tight. Now you understand why we don't bow. She stepped closer, her voice low and determined. That's why I need your help. He looked at her, suspicious but curious. My help? Lyra nodded. I want to end this, she said. Not with rebellion, but with truth. She gestured to the hologram. If I can show the Council that humanity was never the enemy, if I can prove the Empire's lies, maybe we can stop what's coming. Elias frowned. What's coming? Lyra's tone darkened. A full invasion. She explained that the Valorian Council had already approved Operation Purity, a campaign to eliminate human resistance in the outer sectors. Within weeks, fleets would leave for Earth's borders. Elias felt a surge of anger so deep it nearly broke his voice. You're saying they're preparing to exterminate my people? Lyra nodded slowly, her gaze hard. Yes, and I intend to stop them. There was silence between them for a moment. The stars outside the dome flickered like cold fire. Reflecting off Lyra's eyes, Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice. If we do this, you'll be branded a traitor. She gave a faint, bitter smile. Then I'll be the first Valorian to betray a lie. That night, the alliance was born, not between a princess and her captive, but between two souls who refused to obey the chains of history. They met in secret chambers, rewriting data logs, copying encrypted files, and sending coded transmissions through abandoned communication satellites. Each day they grew bolder, and each night they grew closer, not with love, but with trust forged in danger. Lyra learned to think like a human, to plan, to adapt, to fight unseen. She began wearing a hood in the corridors to hide from the scanning drones. Elias taught her how humans hid their plans in plain sight, using art, music, and words instead of code. He carved an ancient Earth phrase onto the inside of his wristband. Truth burns brighter. And she asked what it meant. It means light always finds its way through the dark, he said quietly. But the shadows were not blind in the high towers. The Empress's spies had already intercepted fragments of Lyra's transmissions. They couldn't decode them yet, but they knew she was hiding something. The Empress summoned her top enforcer, High Warden Kareth, a towering alien with eyes like molten gold. Watch my daughter, the Empress ordered, and watch the human. If they move against me, end them both. Unaware of the net closing around them, Lyra and Elias continued their secret work. On the 10th night, Lyra placed the completed data crystal into Elias's hands. This contains proof of everything, she whispered. The truth about the war, the human colonies, and the Council's lies. He held it tightly, knowing its value could change the fate of galaxies. What do we do now? He asked. Lyra looked toward the window where the distant stars burned like watchful eyes. We find someone who will listen, she said, and we make them hear us. Just as she spoke, the lights flickered, the air shifted, and a faint metallic sound echoed beyond the door. Elias's instincts flared. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her behind the console. The doors hissed open and a shadow stepped inside. Armor glinting like night fire, it was Warden Kareth. His voice was low and thunderous. The Empress knows, he said, and she is coming for you both. The alliance of shadows had been discovered, and now the price of truth was about to be paid in blood. The alarm sirens wailed across the palace, their echo rolling through corridors of crystal and steel. Elias pulled Lyra by the wrist, his heart pounding. They ran through a maze of gleaming halls, chased by red lights and echoing boots of the Royal Guard, the great Valorian capital. Once a place of pride, now felt like a cage. Every door locked behind them, every corridor filled with shadows that listened. Lyra's breath came fast, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They've sealed the exits, she said. We can't outrun them. Elias looked around, searching for another path. His gaze caught a narrow maintenance tunnel near the end of the hall. He pressed the wall panel open with brute strength, sparks flying. In here, he said. Move! They slipped into the tunnel just as armored guards flooded the hall. The metal walls vibrated with distant footsteps. The Empire closing in. Elias gritted his teeth. The data crystal tight in his hand. If they caught them now, it wasn't just their lives that would end. It was the truth itself. After what felt like hours, they emerged into the lower chambers of the palace. The chamber opened into a vast circular hall, a place Elias recognized from earlier memories. The Great Hall of Judgment. The same place where Lyra had once claimed him. Now it stood empty, its golden floor reflecting the light of the twin suns rising through the ceiling glass. But as they entered, the lights flickered and the air shimmered. The Empress appeared on the central dais, flanked by her guards, her expression carved in fury. So, she said, her voice cold as space, the traitor returns with her pet human. Lyra stepped forward, her chin high, her tone steady. I am not a traitor, she said. I am your daughter, and I've seen the truth you buried. The Empress's golden armor glinted as she descended the steps, each movement precise, terrifying. You've been poisoned by lies, she said. Humans are chaos given form. You risk everything for one. Elias stood beside Lyra, his voice calm but strong. Maybe she risks everything for everyone, he said. Even for you. The guards tightened their grips on their weapons. but the Empress raised a hand to stop them. Her gaze burned into Elias, studying him like a scientist observing a dangerous creature. "You speak of truth," she said, "then show it. What is it you think you know?" Lyra stepped forward and held up the crystal. "This," she said, "contains the real history of our empire, what you did to his kind, what we became because of it." The Empress's eyes darkened. "And you would expose your own blood to save a dying species?" Lyra's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "I would expose lies to save us all," she said. "You've ruled through fear, but fear can't hold an empire forever." The Empress's face hardened. "Then you leave me no choice," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "I invoke the ancient trial, the judgment of stars." Gasps rippled through the guards. The judgment of stars, an ancient test of honor, where truth was proven not by words but by survival. Lyra's heart pounded, but she nodded. "So be it." Elias stepped forward, his jaw set. "She's not fighting alone," the Empress smirked. "Then you will die together." Moments later, the floor beneath them split apart, lowering them into a massive circular arena. Above, thousands of holographic faces of nobles and citizens appeared, watching from every corner of the empire. The Empress's voice thundered through the air. "Before the galaxy, my daughter defends her betrayal. The human defends his existence." A gate opened at the far end, and 3 colossal figures emerged, war champions of Valoria, armored and roaring, each holding weapons powered by plasma light. Elias and Lyra stood side by side, their reflections glowing in the dust. Lyra looked at him, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Together?" He nodded. "Always." The first warrior charged. His blade slicing through the air, Elias ducked under the swing, rolling across the ground and striking back with a stolen energy spear. The impact sent sparks flying, the arena floor cracking under the force. Lyra leapt high, her blade of light clashing with the second warrior's staff. Each strike shaking the ground. The crowd roared, the Empire watching the impossible, a human and a princess fighting as equals. The third warrior aimed his plasma cannon, firing a burst that could melt steel. Elias grabbed Lyra and pulled her aside, the blast tearing through the floor behind them. They landed hard, but Elias was already moving, charging forward with reckless speed. He drove the spear into the warrior's chest, energy surging through the weapon. The massive alien fell and the crowd gasped. Lyra finished the second warrior with a precise strike that shattered his armor, the explosion lighting up the entire chamber. The last champion roared, swinging his massive hammer down. Elias braced for impact, but Lyra stepped forward, holding out her hand. Her voice echoed across the arena. "Enough!" The Empress's voice crackled over the speakers. "You think mercy will save you?" Lyra looked up, eyes blazing. "No," she said, "but it will save you." The hammer stopped inches from her face. The final warrior, seeing her defiance, lowered his weapon and stepped back. The crowd fell silent. For the first time in Valorian history, a trial had ended not with death but with choice. Elias and Lyra stood together, surrounded by smoke and silence above them. The Empress's image flickered, her face unreadable. She said nothing, but her eyes held something that hadn't been there before. Doubt. As the lights dimmed and the crowd murmured, Lyra looked at Elias and whispered, "It's not over." He nodded, breathing hard. "No," he said. "It's just beginning, high above." The stars burned cold and bright, and across the galaxy, whispers spread of a human and a princess who had defied an empire before the eyes of billions. They called it treason, they called it madness, but to some, it was something far greater, the beginning of the end for the old order of the stars. The arena was silent after the final warrior's fall. The twin suns filtered through the shattered dome above, lighting the dust and smoke that drifted in silver spirals. Elias stood bloodied but unbowed, his chest heaving. His spear cracked in two beside him. Lyra's armor was scorched, her hair loose around her face, her golden eyes fierce and alive. They had survived the judgment of stars, something no one in the Valorian Empire believed possible. Above them, the holographic crowd flickered and rippled. Billions of alien eyes watched from every corner of the galaxy, unsure whether they had just witnessed rebellion or revelation. The Empress remained motionless on her throne high above, her expression unreadable. Elias could feel the tension, the thin thread between survival and execution. He glanced at Lyra. "We've made our point," he murmured. "Now comes the part where they try to erase it." The Empress finally rose, her voice filling the massive chamber. "You fight well, human," she said coldly. But one victory does not undo centuries of law. Lyra raised her head, her voice steady and clear. Then perhaps the law is the problem, she said. A low hiss of outrage rippled through the crowd, nobles shouting in fury, guards gripping their weapons. But the Empress only stared. Her silence was more dangerous than any weapon. Then suddenly, the great doors of the arena opened again. A line of heavily armed guards entered, led by High Warden Kareth, his molten eyes fixed on Lyra and Elias. He bowed slightly toward the Empress. Your Majesty, the Council demands their execution. They say allowing this defiance will fracture the Empire. The Empress hesitated, a moment so rare that even her guards froze. Then she turned her gaze toward her daughter. Do you understand what you've done? Lyra took a step forward, blood streaking her cheek. I've reminded them what we used to be, she said, before fear turned us into tyrants. Kareth's hand tightened on his blade, his tone low and venomous. Your words are treason, he growled. And treason is answered with silence. He raised his sword. But before he could strike, Elias stepped in front of Lyra. His voice rang out across the chamber, calm and defiant. Try it, he said, and the galaxy will see how the Valorian Empire answers truth. With murder, the holographic audience murmured. Across distant worlds, soldiers and civilians watched the broadcast, their faith in the Empire cracking like glass under pressure. The Empress realized it too late. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was history unfolding before all eyes. Kareth swung his blade anyway, the steel singing through the air. Elias blocked it with his broken spear, the force of the strike hurling him backward. Lyra leapt forward, her weapon igniting in a burst of emerald light. The clash of blades echoed like thunder, metal and plasma colliding, sparks scattering like fireflies. Run! Elias shouted, but Lyra shook her head. Not this time, she said, and struck. The impact sent both fighters flying, their weapons shattering. Kareth rose again, roaring with fury, his armor glowing red from the heat of his rage. He charged, but Elias met him head-on, tackling the warden with a soldier's precision. They crashed into the arena floor, rolling in dust and debris. The human fought with desperation, using every ounce of instinct and survival he had left. Kareth slammed a fist into his side, cracking ribs. But Elias didn't stop. He twisted, grabbed the warden's own blade, and drove it through the armor plates beneath his arm. The alien gasped, light flickering in his eyes before fading into darkness. The hall fell silent again. Elias stood trembling, his hands bloodied, the dead warden at his feet. Lyra walked to his side. Placing a hand on his shoulder, the Empress looked down from above, her face pale, her voice barely a whisper. You killed the High Warden, she said. You've destroyed the line of command. Elias looked up, his voice heavy but calm. No, he said. We destroyed the chain. The Empress's hands tightened around her staff, the anger in her eyes slowly fading into something else. Grief, maybe realization. Lyra met her gaze. Mother, end this war, she said softly. Let us start again. The Empress's voice trembled for the first time in her reign. And what if the galaxy refuses? Lyra smiled faintly. Then humanity will show them how to stand. The words carried across the entire empire. Broadcasted through the holofeeds, aliens from countless worlds watched the Empress lower her staff. She looked at her guards, then at the broken floor. Her voice came quiet but final. The judgment is over, she said. The human and the princess live. The guards lowered their weapons, the chamber filled with stunned silence. Elias could barely stand, but when he looked at Lyra, she smiled faintly. For the first time, the Empire had chosen not power but mercy, and somewhere beyond the stars on distant human worlds, soldiers and civilians alike looked up at their screens in disbelief. They had seen a human stand before an empire and survive. They had seen a princess defy her throne for truth. As the Empress turned away, her final words echoed through the hall. If what you say is true, then the age of empires is ending. Lyra looked at Elias, her voice soft. Then let's make sure something better replaces it. Outside, as dawn broke across the alien capital, ships began to move in the skies above, some still loyal, some uncertain, and some inspired and deep within the palace. A single phrase spread like wildfire through every comm channel. 3 words whispered by soldiers, servants, and slaves alike. Truth burns brighter. The Empire's foundation had cracked. But what rose next would decide the fate of both humanity and the stars. And in that fragile silence after war, Elias and Lyra stood together, not as prisoner and princess, but as the first two voices of a new dawn,